I am Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still recovering from the trauma inflicted by my family. As a successful software developer, I have escaped their toxicity, but I still keep in touch occasionally. Last Sunday, they invited me to a fancy lunch to catch up. Between mimosas and buttered toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. Charmaine, you know you are so lucky we still have to mention you. Pity works wonders. I just took a sip of coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, deactivated all of the family's credit accounts, and emailed the lawyer about selling the log cabin. Before continuing this story, let me know where you started reading in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant being privileged to outsiders, but inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house, with its neatly manicured lawn and heated pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's request, despite my preference for green, became my prison sanctuary. From elementary to high school, I maintained my upright character while participating in elite student councils and local charities. I did everything right, yet I was always the invisible daughter. My older brother Julian was the undisputed golden child. He could fail 3 classes in a row, and my father Richard would blame the teachers for not recognizing his unique genius. When I secured a full scholarship to a prestigious university, my parents simply nodded and asked if I could drive Julian to his tennis practice. They never saw me. They only saw what I could do for them. The lunch last Sunday was supposed to be a simple family gathering at the country club. I arrived early wearing a simple black dress and ordered a sparkling water. Soon my parents arrived with Julian and his wife Brooke. Brooke comes from old money in New England. She wore a designer silk dress and carried herself with an air of absolute superiority. My parents worshipped her. They treated her like royalty, desperate to secure their place in her elite social circle. We sat at a large round table by the window. The waiter poured expensive champagne, and my father raised his glass for a toast. "To Julian and Brooke," my father announced proudly. "Welcome back from your incredible month-long vacation on the Amalfi Coast. You two deserve the absolute best." Julian smirked and pulled Brooke closer. They spent the next 20 minutes bragging about private boat tours, luxury villas, and exclusive wine tastings. I listened quietly, picking at my salad. I was exhausted from a recent business trip to London and just wanted to collect the spare keys to my investment property. It was a rustic log cabin on 10 acres of land that I had purchased 3 years ago. "Dad," I said smoothly when there was a lull in the conversation, "I need the spare keys to the log cabin. I have a contractor going out there tomorrow morning for some renovations." My father set his glass down. He looked at my mother, then back at me. A cruel, arrogant smile spread across his face. "You do not need the keys, Charmaine," he said casually. "I sold that cabin last week." I froze. The clinking of silverware around us seemed to stop completely. "You sold my house?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Do not be so dramatic," my mother scolded, rolling her eyes. "Your brother needed a proper honeymoon. Brooke comes from a very important family. We could not let them stay at some cheap resort. We needed cash immediately." I stared at them in absolute disbelief. "The cabin was solely in my name," I said. "You forged my signature on legal real estate documents." Julian laughed aloud. "It was incredibly easy," he sneered. "You always leave your digital signature saved on the family computer network. I just copied it onto the transfer deed. Besides, you owe us. You have been hoarding your tech money while the family business has been slow. Your house paid for our fun." Brooke took a sip of her champagne and looked at me with pure disdain. "Honestly, Charmaine, you should be happy to contribute," she said sweetly. "Family is about sharing wealth. It is not our fault you prefer to be selfish." The sheer audacity of their entitlement was suffocating. They had stolen my property, committed federal fraud, and were now sitting in a luxury country club demanding my gratitude. My father slammed his fist on the table, annoyed by my silence. "Why are you so calm?" my father shouted, drawing the attention of nearby tables. "You always do this. You just sit there with that stupid blank look on your face instead of acting like a normal person. I reached into my leather tote bag. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply smiled and pulled out a thick red folder. I am calm because you did not just sell a house, Dad, I replied, placing the folder right in front of his plate. The log cabin was built on top of an old industrial dumping ground. 3 weeks ago, the Environmental Protection Agency officially designated the soil underneath that property as a highly toxic hazard site. My father frowned, staring at the government seal. What are you talking about? He demanded. I am talking about federal law, I said. Anyone initiating a commercial sale on a toxic site without conducting a mandatory cleanup is hit with an immediate penalty. By forging my signature and transferring the property to Julian's company for cash, you triggered the federal trap. The cleanup fee is $15 million. The color drained from his face as the reality of his massive mistake settled into his mind. My mother dropped her fork in absolute horror. Julian slammed his hands onto the white linen tablecloth, rattling the expensive crystal glasses. You are lying, he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. This is just another one of your pathetic bluffs, Charmaine. You are just jealous that Mom and Dad actually love me and wanted me to have a luxury honeymoon. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the cool leather against my spine. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply tapped the thick red folder sitting in front of our father. Open it, Julian. I challenged him, maintaining unbroken eye contact. Look at the second page. Look at the official stamp from the Environmental Protection Agency. Look at the date. My father, Richard, grabbed the folder with shaking hands. He flipped it open, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text. I watched his breathing turn shallow. Julian leaned over his shoulder, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale. Because you were in such a desperate rush to steal my property, I explained clearly, making sure the neighboring tables at the country club could hear every word. You bypassed the standard title insurance checks. You transferred the deed directly into the name of your supposedly multi-million-dollar real estate startup. The federal government does not care about your luxury vacation to Italy, Julian. They only care about who holds the current deed to a hazardous toxic waste site. By forging my signature and finalizing that commercial sale, your company legally accepted full liability for the $15 million environmental cleanup. The entire dining room of the country club went dead silent. The wealthy patrons, usually too polite to eavesdrop openly, were now openly staring at our table. I could hear the hushed whispers of the elite socialites spreading through the room like wildfire. My parents had spent their entire lives trying to impress these exact people desperate to climb the social ladder by putting me down. Now their ultimate humiliation was playing out in front of their target audience. They had always treated me like an embarrassing secret, but today they were the ultimate spectacle. No, Julian stammered, pulling at his expensive silk tie as if it were choking him. Dad, fix this, call the lawyers. We can reverse the transfer. We can say it was a mistake. We can tell them Charmaine did it. You cannot reverse a recorded federal commercial deed that was executed across state lines, I informed him smoothly. That would require admitting to federal wire fraud and forgery, which carries a mandatory prison sentence. So your choices are either bankruptcy and a $15 million federal fine or 5 years in a federal penitentiary. Which one sounds better for your startup? Brooke had been sitting perfectly still, staring at the documents scattered across the table. The color had completely vanished from her perfectly contoured face. She looked at Julian, then at my parents, and finally at the glaring red warning letter. The realization that her newlywed husband was now millions of dollars in debt hit her like a freight train. Brooke, sweetheart. My mother, Elaine, pleaded, reaching a trembling hand across the table toward her daughter-in-law. Do not worry. We will figure this out. Richard will handle it. We will not let this affect your lifestyle. Brooke snapped. The refined old money New England persona she had maintained all afternoon shattered into a million pieces. She grabbed her half-full crystal champagne flute and hurled it directly at Julian. The glass shattered against his chest, spilling expensive alcohol all over his custom-tailored suit. You absolute idiot! Brooke shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the country club. You told me your company was securing massive investments. You told me this house was a guaranteed asset. You are $15 million in debt to the federal government. Brooke, Please calm down, Julian begged, holding his hands up defensively while champagne dripped down his shirt. Keep your voice down. People are watching us. I do not care who is watching, she screamed, standing up and knocking her chair backward. She glared at my parents with absolute disgust, her eyes flashing with a deeply ingrained prejudice she no longer bothered to hide. My parents warned me about this. They told me not to marry into this family. They said you were all just a bunch of desperate nouveau riche frauds playing dress-up in a world where you do not belong. My mother gasped, clutching her pearl necklace as if Brooke had physically struck her. For years, my parents had worshipped Brooke. They had tolerated her subtle insults, ignored her condescending remarks about our neighborhood, and funded her extravagant lifestyle just to claim they had a daughter-in-law from a powerful white family. They had sacrificed my college funds, my emotional well-being, and my stolen house just to please this woman. And now, she was looking at them like they were dirt on her shoes. Brooke, you cannot mean that, my father said, his voice cracking with desperation. We gave you a beautiful wedding. We funded your trip to the Amalfi Coast. We treated you like royalty. You bought my presents because you are pathetic, Brooke spat back, grabbing her designer handbag from the table. You wanted the social connections my family name brings. Well, congratulations, Richard. You got the name, and now you have the federal fraud charges to match your actual class level. My father is going to destroy you for dragging me into this mess. Julian reached out to grab her arm, tears welling in his eyes. Brooke, do not leave. We just got married. We can fight this together. I promise I will make it right. Brooke yanked her arm away violently, wiping her hand on her expensive dress as if his touch had contaminated her. Fight? What, Julian? You have no money. Your startup is a complete scam. I married a successful entrepreneur, not a broke criminal who has to steal from his own sister to pay for a vacation. I am calling my father right now. We are filing for an annulment before your toxic debt ruins my credit score. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the dining room, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. The silence she left behind was suffocating. My mother covered her face with her hands and began to sob uncontrollably, realizing that her golden child's perfect marriage had just disintegrated in less than 5 minutes. My father sat paralyzed in his chair, staring at the red folder as if it were a ticking bomb. Julian dropped his head onto the table, surrounded by shattered glass and spilled champagne. I picked up my sparkling water, took a slow, refreshing sip, and enjoyed the beautiful chaos they had brought entirely upon themselves. The illusion of their flawless life was finally broken. They had stolen my property, hoping to secure their fake high society status. Instead, they had handed me the perfect weapon to destroy their entire legacy. I watched them crumble, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of long overdue justice and peace. My mother scrambled frantically toward the exit. My father was right behind her. They caught up to Brooke just as she reached the grand foyer. I followed at a leisurely pace, holding my glass of sparkling water. The lobby was packed with local politicians and socialites who stopped to watch. Brooke, please wait, my mother cried out. She dropped to her knees, clutching the hem of Brooke's designer coat. My mother, who spent her life pretending to be elite, was now crawling on the floor begging a woman who had just hurled racist insults at our family. You cannot leave Julian. This is a misunderstanding. Richard will pay the fines. Do not throw away your marriage. My father stood beside her, nodding vigorously. We value our relationship with your family above everything, he pleaded, his voice trembling. Julian is a brilliant CEO. He can bounce back. Please, Brooke, let us handle the financial burden. Just stay. Brooke looked down at my parents as if they were a disease. She yanked her coat out of my mother's grip. Are you both completely deaf? Brooke snapped. I do not care about Julian. My family does not associate with criminals facing federal prosecution. Do not ever contact me again. She marched out the glass double doors, leaving my parents in the center of the crowded lobby like absolute fools. The whispers of the patrons grew louder. My mother slowly pulled herself up from the marble floor. She turned around and saw me standing near the archway, perfectly calm. The sheer panic in her eyes instantly morphed into blinding, irrational rage. She could not direct her anger at the wealthy white woman who had just verbally destroyed her, so she directed it at me. "You did this!" my mother screamed, storming toward me. "You orchestrated this disaster just to ruin your brother." "You have always been insanely jealous of Julian. You could not stand watching him marry a connected woman. You could not handle the fact that he built a wildly successful technology company while you just write boring code. You are a bitter, evil daughter, and you just destroyed his life out of pure spite." Julian emerged from the dining room, his suit soaked in champagne. He stood behind our parents, trying to look like a victim. "She set me up, Mom," he whined pathetically. "Charmaine knew that land was toxic, and she deliberately tricked me into taking the deed so I would be stuck with the $15 million penalty. She is trying to bankrupt my company because she knows my startup is about to go public and make millions." I looked at Julian, then at my screaming mother and my red-faced father. Instead of feeling defensive, a genuine joyful laugh bubbled up from my chest. I laughed so hard that a few onlookers stepped back in surprise. My laughter echoed through the silent lobby, bright and unapologetic. "What is so funny?" my father roared, taking a threatening step toward me. "Your brother is facing a federal crisis and a divorce, and you are laughing." I let a cold, hard smile settle on my face. "I am laughing because you are still standing here talking about Julian's successful company," I said clearly. "I am laughing because you are defending a fake CEO." I reached into my tote bag again. I pulled out a thick stack of printed financial statements and tossed them directly onto the marble floor at my mother's feet. The pages fanned out, revealing highlighted banking records, negative balances, and official bankruptcy filings. "Pick it up, Mom," I commanded, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Pick up the financial history of your golden child's brilliant technology startup." My mother stared at the papers, her breathing ragged. She refused to move, so I looked at my father. "Julian's company has never made a single dollar of profit," I announced loudly, ensuring everyone heard. "His startup has been legally bankrupt for 12 months. He has 0 investors and no product. His company is currently $5 million in the red. He did not forge my signature to fund a luxury Italian honeymoon. He forged it to sell my house for quick cash just to pay his overdue business loans and keep Brooke from finding out he was totally broke." Julian's face turned completely gray. "Do not listen to her," he stammered. "She fabricated those documents." "I did not fabricate anything," I countered sharply, "because the real tragedy is not even Julian's fake business. The real tragedy is how he has been funding his fake CEO lifestyle for the past year." I turned my attention entirely to my mother, watching her eyes widen in absolute terror. "You thought you were so clever, Mom," I said softly, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You thought no one would ever notice the missing money. But when I hired a forensic accountant to track down who processed the illegal deed transfer, they uncovered a very interesting secondary money trail." My mother clamped her hands over her ears. "Stop talking," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Charmaine, stop talking right now." "You have been secretly draining grandmother's retirement trust fund," I revealed, delivering the ultimate death blow to her reputation. "For the last 12 months, you have been illegally wiring thousands of dollars from your own mother's dementia care account directly into Julian's business account. You stole from a sick elderly woman just to buy Julian designer suits, lease his luxury cars, and pay for his lavish dates with Brooke. You jeopardized grandmother's medical care just so your precious son could pretend to be a successful entrepreneur." The collective gasp from the elite country club members was distinctly audible. My father turned slowly to look at his weeping wife, his jaw dropping in total shock. My mother collapsed backward against a pillar, sliding to the cold floor as her crimes crushed her. The federal fine was just the beginning. My father's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The polished, sophisticated patriarch of the family vanished, replaced by a desperate man whose entire reputation was burning to ash in the middle of the country club lobby. He stepped over the scattered financial documents, completely ignoring his weeping wife on the floor. His fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white. He marched directly toward me, closing the distance until he was mere inches from my face. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath and see the frantic pulsating vein in his neck. He raised his hand, pointing a trembling finger right between my eyes. "You vindictive, ungrateful little wretch!" My father hissed, his voice vibrating with venom. "You think you can just waltz in here and destroy my family? You think you can humiliate us in front of the most important people in Fairfield? I built this family name. I gave you the clothes on your back and the food in your mouth. You are nothing without me. I will not let you stand here and spew lies about your mother and your brother." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked him dead in the eye, maintaining the exact same calm demeanor that always infuriated him. "I am not spewing lies, Dad," I replied evenly. "I am just reading the bank statements. The math does not lie, even if you do." That pushed him over the edge. My father lunged forward, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising, forceful grip. His fingers dug painfully into my skin as he tried to physically drag me toward the heavy oak doors of the lobby. "Get your hands off me," I warned him, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "I am throwing you out myself!" he roared, completely abandoning any remaining shred of country club etiquette. The surrounding guests gasped, stepping back as the scene turned physical. "You are not my daughter. You are a sociopath. Help!" he shouted, turning his head toward the front desk. "Security? Get security in here right now. I want this woman removed from the premises immediately. Use whatever force is necessary." Within seconds, the heavy doors of the security office swung open. 3 large men dressed in crisp, black tactical suits hurried into the lobby. The head of security, a towering, broad-shouldered man named Thomas, led the charge. My father had always been friendly with Thomas, tipping him generously during the holidays to ensure our family received preferential treatment and absolute privacy. My father released my arm and gestured wildly toward me, his chest heaving with exertion. "Thomas, thank God," my father barked, adjusting his jacket to regain some semblance of authority. "Grab her. Drag her out the back service entrance. She is trespassing and she is causing a severe disturbance. I want her permanently banned from this club and the entire gated community. Do not be gentle about it. Get her out of my sight." Thomas stopped walking. The 2 guards behind him also stopped, planting their feet firmly on the marble floor. They did not reach for me. They did not even look at me with aggression. Instead, Thomas crossed his arms over his chest and stared blankly at my father. "I am sorry, Richard," Thomas said, his voice flat and professional. "But I cannot do that." My father blinked, thoroughly confused. He looked at Thomas, then at the other guards, and then back at me. "What do you mean you cannot do that?" my father demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "I am a platinum tier member of this club. I am a resident of the Primary Estate Association. I pay your salary. Thomas, I am giving you a direct order to remove this trespassing lunatic from the building." "You do not pay his salary, Dad," I interjected smoothly, smoothing out the sleeve of my dress where he had grabbed me. "And you do not give the orders here anymore." I reached into my leather tote bag for the final time. I pulled out a crisp black folder and held it up for the entire lobby to see. The murmurs of the wealthy guests reached a fever pitch. They were completely captivated by the destruction of the so-called perfect family. I walked slowly toward my father, savoring every single second of his absolute bewilderment. "You have been standing here screaming about how I ruined Julian's life," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent lobby. "You have been screaming about how I destroyed Mom's reputation. But you conveniently forgot to mention your own financial crimes, did you not? You wanted everyone to think Julian was the only one in the family struggling with money. But the truth is, you are the biggest fraud of them all." My father swallowed hard. The aggressive posture he had held just moments ago began to deflate. "Shut your mouth, Charmaine," he warned weakly. "You secretly mortgaged the sprawling family estate 3 times," I announced, dropping the bombshell with perfect precision. "You took out massive high-interest loans against the colonial house just to keep paying your platinum country club fees and maintain your fake elite status. You leveraged the house to the absolute maximum limit, and then you defaulted on the payment 6 months ago. The bank was going to foreclose on you next week." "That is private information," My father shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "You hacked my accounts! That is illegal!" "I did not hack into anything," I corrected him softly, tapping the heavy black folder. When a bank forecloses on a residential estate, they package that distressed debt and sell it to private equity firms at a huge discount. My private equity firm bought your distressed debt last Tuesday. Legally speaking, I own the colonial house. I own the lawn and the heated pool. I also bought the security contracting company. Thomas works for me now, Dad. My father stumbled backward as if a physical blade had hit his chest. His knees buckled under the weight of his ruin. He reached out blindly, grabbing the edge of a mahogany console table to keep from collapsing onto the marble floor. His breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving violently beneath his expensive suit jacket. The patriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist was now fighting for air in the lobby of his precious country club. Thomas, the head of security, stepped away from my father and stood dutifully by my side, adopting a protective stance that signaled his new allegiance. My mother Elaine let out a high-pitched wail of despair, burying her tear-streaked face in her hands. She finally understood that there was no safety net left. The colonial house, her ultimate symbol of neighborhood supremacy, belonged to the daughter she had just spent 30 minutes tearing down. Julian looked like a hollow shell of a human being. He was completely trapped. He had no house, no money, and a $15 million federal fine hanging over his head. But Brooke was not finished. Her initial shock had quickly morphed into a vicious, calculated fury. She had been humiliated, and in her elite world, humiliation was a crime that required immediate retaliation. She pulled her sleek smartphone from her designer purse with trembling fingers. She tapped the screen aggressively and put the phone on speaker, holding it up so the entire lobby could hear the incoming call. "I am calling my father," Brooke announced, her voice dripping with pure malice. She glared at me, her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Charmaine. You have no idea how the real world operates. You have no idea what real power looks like. My father is going to obliterate you." The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the high ceilings of the country club foyer. "Brooke, sweetheart," the man answered, sounding slightly annoyed by the interruption. "I am in the middle of a board meeting. What is it?" "Dad, I need you to crush someone for me right now," Brooke demanded, her tone shifting into that of a spoiled, entitled child who was used to getting exactly what she wanted. "Julian is a complete fraud. His entire family is a disgusting group of scam artists. His sister Charmaine just tricked him into accepting a $15 million federal environmental fine, and she is trying to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire country club. I want her destroyed." There was a brief pause on the line. When Preston Sterling spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave, resonating with a terrifying cold authority. Preston was a legendary real estate tycoon, a man who possessed generational wealth and political connections. He destroyed small businesses for sport and ruined lives without a second thought. "Who is this woman?" Preston demanded, the hostility bleeding through the speakerphone. Brooke thrust the phone closer to my face. "Tell him who you are, you pathetic little social climber." I leaned in, maintaining my bright, unwavering smile. "Hello, Mr. Sterling. My name is Charmaine. I am Julian's sister." "Listen to me very carefully, Charmaine," Preston growled, articulating every single syllable with lethal precision. "I do not care what kind of petty family drama you are running here. You made a fatal mistake the second you decided to involve my daughter. I know every judge, every city council member, and every bank executive in this state. By tomorrow morning, I will have your private equity firm permanently blacklisted from every financial institution on the East Coast. I will use my political leverage to have your business licenses revoked. I will bury you in crushing lawsuits so you spend the rest of your life paying legal fees. And when you are bankrupt, I will personally see to it that you are arrested for extortion." My mother, who had been weeping on the floor, suddenly stopped crying. A twisted, triumphant smile broke through her tears. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with malicious glee. She actually believed that Preston Sterling was going to save them. She believed that aligning herself with this powerful, wealthy man was her ultimate salvation. "You hear that, Charmaine?" My mother gloated, her voice raspy but arrogant. You messed with the wrong family. You thought you could outsmart us, but you are nothing compared to the Sterling Empire. Preston will wipe you off the map. You are going to end up in a prison cell exactly where a spiteful failure like you belongs. My father also seems to gain a fraction of his confidence back. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, breathing heavily as he leaned against the table. You overplayed your hand, Charmaine, he sneered, clearly enjoying the threats. You always were too ambitious for your own good. I stood perfectly still, letting the heavy silence stretch out across the room. The country club guests watched with bated breath, fully expecting me to cower, apologize, or beg for mercy from the unseen billionaire on the phone. I did none of those things. I simply let out a soft, amused sigh and adjusted my leather tote bag. Are you quite finished speaking, Mr. Sterling? I asked him, politely, projecting a serene confidence that immediately threw Brooke off balance. I have not even started with you, Preston threatened, his voice echoing loudly from the phone speaker. I am going to make you wish you were never born. You will regret the very day you decided to cross my path, Charmaine. That is a very passionate speech, Mr. Sterling, I replied, my tone casual and conversational. But before you spend the rest of your afternoon plotting my glorious downfall, I highly recommend you step away from your very important board meeting and open your laptop. You need to check your company's livestock portfolio immediately. There was a dead silence on the phone. A heavy click signaled the end of the call. Brooke sneered, crossing her arms over her chest, fully convinced that her billionaire father was simply ignoring my empty threats. My parents let out a collective breath of relief, believing that Preston had dismissed me as a minor nuisance. But I knew exactly where Preston Sterling was right now. His massive corporate holding company owned the very country club we were standing in, and his executive boardroom was located just on the third floor of this exact building. Less than 5 minutes later, the polished brass elevator doors across the grand lobby dinged open. Preston Sterling stormed out, flanked by 3 older men in sharp gray suits, carrying thick leather briefcases. His face was a mask of unbridled fury, his jaw set so tightly it looked like it might snap. He marched directly toward our group, his heavy footsteps echoing ominously across the marble floor. Brooke let out a triumphant, vindictive laugh. She ran toward him like a spoiled child expecting a savior, her arms outstretched to embrace the man who was going to destroy my life. Preston completely ignored his daughter. He stepped right past her outstretched arms, brushing her aside as if she were a complete stranger. He stopped directly in front of me, his chest heaving. One of his lawyers stepped forward and slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto the nearest mahogany table with a loud, aggressive thud. Preston leaned in, trying to use his intimidating physical size to make me cower. He pointed a thick manicured finger at my face. You have exactly 1 minute to explain what kind of financial terrorism you are trying to pull, Charmaine. Preston growled, his voice low and dangerous. My legal team has already drafted an emergency injunction. We are filing for immediate asset freezes, crippling defamation lawsuits, and a restraining order. You are going to be tied up in litigation until you are old and gray. Now explain yourself before I end your entire career. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I calmly walked over to the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall above the lobby fireplace, which was usually reserved for displaying golf tournament scores and club announcements. I pulled a small high-speed casting cable from my leather tote bag and plugged it into my smartphone. I tapped a few buttons to mirror my screen directly to the television, then stepped aside so Preston, my family, and the entire crowd of wealthy onlookers could clearly see the bright display. I am not pulling any kind of terrorism, Mr. Sterling, I said smoothly, gesturing toward the screen. I am simply conducting business. I suggest you look at the board. I opened the live global stock exchange feed. The numbers flashed in bright green and red across the massive television. I zoomed in on the stock ticker for Sterling Hospitality Group, Preston's flagship enterprise, and the crown jewel of his generational wealth. I showed him the staggering volume of trading that had occurred under the radar over the past 72 hours. A proxy holding company operating through a series of shell corporations had been aggressively and silently acquiring shares in his company, Preston stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process the massive shift in equity. "What is this?" he demanded, though a slight tremor of panic had entered his voice. "Who is making these block trades?" I clicked the screen again, revealing the corporate ownership structure of that aggressive proxy holding company. The official filing documents appeared in crisp, undeniable high definition. The sole proprietor, the majority stakeholder of the proxy firm, was me. I explained the math to him slowly, ensuring that every single person in the country club understood the magnitude of his defeat. Over the last 3 days, I leveraged the capital from my private equity firm to buy out your silent partners. I now officially control 51% of Sterling Hospitality Group. I am your majority shareholder, Preston. If you proceed with this ridiculous lawsuit against me, you will be suing your own boss. I currently hold the absolute power to liquidate your prime assets, fire your entire board of directors, and strip you of your executive title by tomorrow morning. You cannot blacklist me in Atlanta or anywhere else because I now own the very tables where you sit. The warm color drained completely from Preston's face in an instant. The harsh, undeniable realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He looked up at the television screen, then gazed down at the aggressive legal papers his expensive lawyer had just slammed onto the table. He slowly reached out with a shaking hand and carefully pulled the lawsuit back toward his chest. The ruthless, untouchable real estate tycoon suddenly realized that he was totally, utterly, and completely powerless against my financial strategy. Brooke, completely oblivious to the complex financial reality displayed on the screen, stepped forward and started screaming at her father. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, stomping her foot on the marble floor. "Do not just stand there looking at her. Destroy her dad. Call the police and have her dragged away in handcuffs. She ruined my wedding. She ruined Julian. I want her locked up right now." Preston turned slowly to face his daughter. The intense, boiling rage that he could not safely direct at me found its only available vulnerable target. He looked at the daughter who had foolishly married into a family of bankrupt frauds, the daughter whose petty, arrogant drama had just dragged his entire corporate empire into a hostile takeover. Preston raised his right hand high into the air and slapped Brooke violently across the cheek. The sharp cracking sound of the impact echoed through the silent lobby like a gunshot. Brooke stumbled backward, crying out in shock as she clutched her stinging face. Preston Sterling did not offer a single word of apology to his daughter. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, his eyes completely devoid of any paternal warmth or basic human sympathy. "You stupid, arrogant little girl." Preston snarled, his voice low and vibrating with absolute disgust. "I spent millions grooming you for high society, and you tied yourself to a pathetic, bankrupt criminal who just cost me the controlling share of my own empire. Do not ever call me for help again. You are entirely on your own." Preston turned his back on his sobbing daughter. He gestured sharply to his legal team, and without another glance at the shattered illusion of our family, he marched out of the expansive country club lobby. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him, leaving a suffocating heavy silence in his wake that seemed to stretch out for an eternity. Julian stood frozen, staring at the empty space where his billionaire father-in-law had just been standing. The absolute panic radiating from my brother was palpable. His ultimate shield, the powerful white family he had used to elevate his social status, had just completely evaporated. There was no bailout coming. There were no elite lawyers coming to save him from the $15 million federal environmental fine. Julian's eyes darted frantically around the room, landing on the judgmental faces of the country club members, then on his weeping wife, and finally on me. He looked exactly like a cornered animal, realizing the steel trap had permanently snapped shut around his leg. He needed a way out, and he needed a scapegoat. The survival instincts of a golden child who had never faced a single consequence in his entire 36 years of life violently kicked in. "I did not do it," Julian suddenly screamed, throwing his hands up in the air. His voice cracked, echoing shrilly across the marble floors. "I did not forge the signature. It was not my idea." My father, Richard, who had been leaning heavily against the console table, snapped his head up in confusion. "Julian, what are you doing? Shut your mouth right now before you make this worse." No, I am not going down for this, Julian yelled, backing away from our father, as if the older man were suddenly radioactive and highly contagious. Julian pointed an accusing, trembling finger directly at my parents. They made me do it. Mom and Dad orchestrated the entire thing. They knew the startup was out of money. They knew I needed cash to pay for the Amalfi Coast honeymoon to keep Brooke happy. They forced me to copy Charmaine's digital signature from the home computer. My mother Elaine let out a choked, devastated gasp. She had spent her entire existence shielding Julian from reality, sacrificing my emotional well-being and personal boundaries just to ensure his path was flawlessly paved with gold. She had drained her own mother's dementia care fund just to finance his fake corporate lifestyle. And now, in the very moment he was facing actual ruin, he was feeding her directly to the wolves to save his own skin. "Julian, my sweet boy, please stop," my mother begged, her voice cracking as fresh tears poured down her ruined makeup. "We did everything for you. Do not say these terrible things." "You told me it was foolproof," Julian shrieked, completely ignoring his mother's shattered heart. He turned toward the crowd of elite onlookers, desperately pleading his case to the socialites who were watching him with absolute revulsion. "My dad set up the illegal deed transfer. My mom stole the money from the retirement accounts to pay the notary. I am completely innocent. I am a victim of their toxic greed." I stood quietly near the television screen, sipping my sparkling water. The beautiful poetic justice of watching this family tear itself apart from the inside out was absolutely intoxicating. They had spent decades building a massive, impenetrable fortress of lies, and now they were tearing each other to pieces, trying to escape the burning wreckage. Julian was publicly confessing to a massive federal crime, simultaneously implicating our parents as co-conspirators. The local politicians and wealthy socialites stood watching in total shock, witnessing the complete implosion of the supposedly perfect household. Brooke slowly lowered her trembling hand from her red, stinging cheek. The fresh tears of pain in her eyes hardened rapidly into sharp shards of pure, unadulterated hatred. She glared at her husband, the man she had married in a lavish, highly publicized ceremony just 3 months ago. She finally saw the pathetic, sniveling fraud hiding beneath his expensive designer suits. "You spineless, broke, pathetic excuse for a man!" Brooke hissed, her voice dripping with venom. She reached for her left hand and aggressively yanked the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. She threw the heavy ring directly at Julian. It hit him squarely in the chest and bounced onto the marble floor with a sharp clatter. "I am divorcing you," Brooke announced loudly, making sure every single person in the lobby heard her declaration. "I am filing the paperwork the absolute second I leave this building. And since we are legally married, I am taking half of everything you own. I want half of the startup assets, half of the bank accounts, and half of whatever hidden money you stole from your pathetic mother. I will bleed you completely dry, Julian. You will be living on the street by the time my divorce attorneys are finished with you." Julian dropped to his knees, frantically scrambling on the cold marble floor to pick up the discarded diamond ring. He looked up at his furious wife, his face completely contorted in absolute terror and desperate grief. "Brooke, please! You cannot take half my company. It is all I have left. We can fix this. I will make the money back." I could not hold back my laughter any longer. The sharp, bright sound of my amusement cut through the heavy tension in the room. Brooke whipped her head around to glare at me, her eyes flashing with renewed hostility. "What are you laughing at, Charmaine?" Brooke snapped, taking a threatening step in my direction. "I am going to take half of his entire estate. I am going to ruin him." I slowly shook my head, offering her a smile of pure condescending pity. "You are not going to take a single dime from him, Brooke," I replied calmly, "because you are missing a very critical, very fatal flaw in your grand revenge plan." Brooke scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "I am his legal wife, Charmaine. I am legally entitled to half of his financial assets in a divorce. There is absolutely nothing you or your fraudulent, disgusting family can do to stop me from taking my rightful share. I will take the house, the cars, and the bank accounts." I took another slow, deliberate sip of my cold, sparkling water and met her furious, unyielding gaze. "You are completely forgetting about the legal paperwork, Brooke. The silence that followed my statement was absolute and suffocating. I watched Brooke's perfectly contoured face, pale as the initial confusion slowly morphed into a creeping, icy dread. For her entire life, her generational wealth had been an impenetrable shield, excusing her cruelty and elevating her above the consequences of the real world. Now, she could sense that shield cracking. The country club lobby, previously buzzing with the hushed, scandalized whispers of Fairfield's elite, fell so quiet that the faint ticking of the grandfather clock near the entrance sounded like a booming gavel. Julian was still on his knees, his expensive suit clinging to his champagne-soaked skin, looking like a pathetic, discarded puppet whose strings had just been violently cut. He reached out to Brooke again, his fingers trembling, uttering a pathetic apology that barely registered above a whisper. But Brooke did not see a grieving husband anymore. She was beginning to look at him like a massive $15 million anchor tied directly to her neck. My mother Elaine was hyperventilating near the console table, watching her ultimate prize, a wealthy, well-connected daughter-in-law, standing on the precipice of abandoning them forever. The golden path she had spent decades paving for Julian, a path paved entirely with my stolen college funds and my grandmother's drained accounts, had just led them directly off a sheer cliff. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my sparkling water. The carbonation burned pleasantly against my throat. I had not just defeated them financially. I was surgically dismantling the very psychological foundation of their arrogance. Every single lie they had told to elevate themselves was being weaponized against them in real time right in front of the very audience they had sacrificed my humanity to impress. I drafted that prenuptial agreement for Julian 3 years ago, I explained, letting the truth wash over her furious expression. My parents were terrified that a woman would eventually try to take half of his supposed tech fortune, so they asked me to anonymously draw up the legal framework to protect family assets. But since I knew exactly who my brother really was, I included a very specific ironclad morality and liability clause. It states that if either party commits a federal felony, engages in egregious financial fraud, or brings severe legal debt into the marriage, the spousal support and asset division clauses are completely voided. Because Julian just committed federal wire fraud by forging my signature on that commercial deed, he triggered the penalty clause. You do not get half of his assets, Brooke. You get absolutely nothing. You are walking away from this marriage with $0, permanently tied to a bankrupt felon who owes the Environmental Protection Agency $15 million. Brooke's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant old money superiority vanished from her eyes, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of impending poverty. She looked at Julian, who was still kneeling on the floor, clutching the discarded diamond ring. He reached a trembling hand toward her, silently begging for her support. Brooke physically recoiled in disgust. She turned around, shoved her way through the crowd of whispering country club members, and ran out the front doors, fleeing into the afternoon sun. She was gone forever. Julian let out a gut-wrenching sob, curling into a pathetic ball on the cold marble floor. The murmurs of the elite guests intensified into loud, openly judgmental conversations. They were pointing at my parents, shaking their heads, and pulling out their smartphones to text the scandalous details to everyone in their social circles. The illusion of my family's flawless high society reputation was officially dead. My mother Elaine looked wildly around the grand foyer. She saw the wealthy church ladies she had spent decades trying to impress, staring at her with blatant contempt. She saw her golden child sobbing in a puddle of spilled champagne. She realized that she had absolutely no leverage left. She could not argue with the financial documents, she could not argue with the federal law, and she could not charm her way out of the social execution playing out in real time. She desperately needed a distraction. She needed to change the narrative from her unforgivable crimes to her immediate victimization. My mother let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She brought both of her hands up to her chest, clutching the fabric of her expensive silk dress. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she intentionally let her knees buckle. She collapsed onto the marble floor with a loud thud, sprawling out perfectly in the center of the lobby. "Elaine!" My father roared, throwing himself onto the floor beside her. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her frantically. "Someone call an ambulance right now. She is having a massive heart attack." The country club manager immediately sprinted toward the reception desk, grabbing the landline to dial emergency services. The crowd gasped in horror, taking a collective step back to give them space. My father looked up at me from the floor, his face completely red with manufactured outrage. "Look at what you have done, Charmaine," he screamed, pointing an accusing finger at my face. "You pushed her too far. You are killing your own mother. You stressed her heart so much with your vicious, evil lies that you sent her into cardiac arrest. If she dies right here on this floor, it is entirely your fault. You are a murderer." I did not move. I did not call for help, and I did not shed a single tear. I just looked down at the woman lying on the floor, noting the way her eyelids fluttered slightly to gauge the crowd's reaction. Because Fairfield Country Club catered to the elderly elite, they had a private emergency medical team stationed less than 2 blocks away. Within 3 minutes, the heavy oak doors burst open. 2 uniformed paramedics rushed into the lobby carrying a heavy red trauma bag and an automated external defibrillator. They pushed through the crowd, dropping to their knees right next to my father. "Step back, sir," the lead paramedic commanded, immediately reaching for his stethoscope and trauma shears. "We need to secure her airway and get the chest pads on her immediately. How long has she been unresponsive?" "Just a few minutes," my father cried, playing the role of the devastated, grieving husband with Oscar-worthy dedication. "Please, you have to save her. My malicious daughter caused this." The paramedic reached out to rip the silk fabric of my mother's dress to apply the defibrillator pads. "Stop," I said, clearly stepping forward and interrupting the medical procedure. "Do not ruin her expensive dress. She is not having a heart attack." "Ma'am, step back immediately," the second paramedic warned me, glaring with absolute authority. "This is a life-or-death medical emergency." "No, it is a theatrical performance," I corrected him smoothly. I walked over to my mother's supposedly unconscious body. I reached down and grabbed her left wrist. She tried to pull her arm away, a dead giveaway that she was perfectly awake, but I held on tightly. I turned her wrist over, exposing the sleek, expensive smartwatch she wore every single day to track her fitness goals. The screen automatically illuminated when I tilted it toward the paramedics. "Look at the health application on her watch," I instructed the lead paramedic. He frowned, leaning in to look at the bright digital display. The heart rate monitor application was open and actively tracking her pulse in real time. "Her vitals are completely perfectly stable," I announced to the silent room. The paramedic checked her pulse fully, realizing she was faking. He stood up in disgust, permanently vaporizing her remaining social dignity. The paramedic shook his head, grabbed his heavy red trauma bag, and signaled for his partner to leave. "Do not ever call emergency services for a theatrical stunt again," the paramedic warned my father loudly, ensuring the entire lobby heard him. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind the medical team, leaving my parents drowning in the absolute silence of their social execution. The wealthy elite of Fairfield Country Club did not just look disappointed, they looked utterly repulsed. Several prominent board members turned their backs, simultaneously shielding their wives and whispering furiously as they walked away from the center of the foyer. My mother Elaine remained sprawled on the cold marble floor. The theatrical swoon had completely backfired. She slowly opened her eyes, realizing that no one was rushing to comfort her. No one was offering a sympathetic shoulder. She had weaponized her health to manipulate a room full of powerful people, and the undeniable proof of her deception was still glowing brightly on her own wrist. My father Richard watched his lifelong friends and vital business connections physically distance themselves from our family. He saw the profound, irreversible damage that had just been inflicted upon his legacy. He had lost the sprawling colonial estate. He had lost his pristine reputation. He had lost the wealthy daughter-in-law who was supposed to elevate their social standing. His golden child Julian was still sitting on the floor, weeping over a canceled marriage and a $15 million federal environmental fine. There was absolutely nothing left of the glorious empire my father thought he controlled. The desperation in his eyes morphed into something entirely different. The frantic, uncoordinated anger vanished, replaced by a cold reptilian calculation. He needed leverage, and he needed it immediately. My father suddenly lunged forward. He clamped his large hand around my elbow, his grip tight but careful enough not to draw immediate attention from the remaining stragglers in the lobby. "Walk with me," he hissed through gritted teeth, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right now, Charmaine, we are going to have a private conversation." I did not resist. I allowed him to guide me away from the bright, echoing expanse of the main foyer. He pulled me around a corner and pushed me into a dimly lit, secluded hallway that led toward the private executive meeting rooms. The heavy velvet curtains and thick carpet muffled the sounds of the chaotic lobby we had just left behind. We were completely alone. He released my arm and took a step back, straightening his ruined suit jacket and smoothing his silver hair. He took a deep, shuddering breath, attempting to summon the commanding presence that had dictated my entire childhood. "You think you have won, do you not?" My father began, his voice dripping with a dark, menacing superiority. "You think you can just orchestrate this massive spectacle, steal my property, and walk away clean? But you are forgetting who taught you how to play this game, Charmaine. I have spent 30 years building relationships with the most influential newspaper editors, financial journalists, and television producers in this state. I have favors to call in, and I am going to use every single one of them to destroy you." I leaned against the textured wallpaper, crossing my arms over my chest. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Dad?" I asked calmly, feigning a mild curiosity. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. He believed he had finally found my weak point. "I am going to call an emergency press conference tomorrow morning," my father threatened, stepping closer to intimidate me. "I am going to tell the media that your private equity firm is a complete sham. I will tell them that you built your corporate empire using dirty money you embezzled from my business accounts. I will fabricate a story so compelling, so incredibly detailed, that the Securities and Exchange Commission will have no choice but to launch a full investigation into your firm. I will accuse you of insider trading, of elder abuse against your own grandmother, and of orchestrating a hostile financial takeover against your own family just to satisfy your psychotic greed." He paused, letting the heavy threats hang in the quiet hallway. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing into cold, calculating slits. "Investors despise scandal, Charmaine. The moment those headlines hit the internet, your clients will pull their capital. Your firm will collapse overnight. You will be toxic. But I am a reasonable man. I am willing to remain completely silent. I will not call the press, and I will not ruin your pristine reputation on two very simple conditions." I tilted my head, maintaining my pleasant expression. "Let me guess," I said smoothly. "You want the house back." "I want the deed to the estate transferred back into my name by midnight," my father demanded. "And I want you to authorize a wire transfer of $15 million from your personal accounts directly to the Environmental Protection Agency to cover Julian's fine. You have the liquidity, Charmaine. You are going to pay the penalty, you are going to give me my home back, and you are going to fix this mess. If you refuse, I will burn your professional life to the ground." "You have exactly 10 seconds to decide." I did not need 10 seconds. I reached into the pocket of my black dress and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was already glowing. I held the device up between us, making sure the bright display caught the dim light of the hallway. A digital audio recording application was open on the screen. The red timer was actively ticking upward, capturing every single sound in the secluded corridor. My father stared at the red recording icon. The cruel, triumphant smile slid right off his face, replaced by a sudden, suffocating horror. I pressed the stop button, saved the audio file, and then pressed play. My father's own voice echoed back to him from the phone speaker, crystal clear and perfectly articulated. "I am going to tell the media that your private equity firm is a sham. I want the deed to the estate. I want you to authorize a wire transfer of $15 million. If you refuse, I will burn your professional life to the ground." I stopped the playback and locked my phone, slipping it safely back into my pocket. "You have always underestimated me, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You thought you could drag me into a dark hallway and bully me into submission, but you just handed me the final nail for your coffin. Threatening to fabricate financial crimes to the media unless I pay you $15 million is the textbook definition of extortion. Extortion is a federal felony. My father opened his mouth, but he could not find the air to speak. He was completely paralyzed. I am taking this audio file, I continued ruthlessly, and I am adding it to the encrypted digital folder I have already prepared. That folder contains the forged property deed, the unauthorized transfers from grandmother's medical trust, and Julian's fraudulent bankruptcy declarations. I am sending every single piece of evidence directly to the authorities. My father remained completely paralyzed against the textured wallpaper of the secluded corridor. The sheer magnitude of his defeat finally registered in his hollow, bloodshot eyes. He had tried to play the ultimate game of blackmail, and he had lost absolutely everything in the process. He slowly slid down the wall, his expensive suit wrinkling as he collapsed into a pathetic, defeated heap on the carpet. I did not offer him a single glance of pity. I simply stepped around him and walked back toward the chaotic, echoing expanse of the main lobby. When I emerged from the hallway, the scene in the grand foyer had descended into total madness. My mother was still sitting on the cold marble floor, weeping hysterically, while the remaining country club staff actively ignored her. But my eyes immediately sought out my brother. Julian was no longer kneeling in the puddle of spilled champagne. I scanned the shrinking crowd of elite socialites, watching them gather their coats and whisper furiously. Julian was missing. I quickly walked toward the massive glass windows that overlooked the sprawling, manicured parking lot of the country club. I spotted him instantly. Julian was sprinting across the pristine green lawn, completely bypassing the valet stand. His champagne-soaked suit jacket flapped wildly in the afternoon breeze. He was clutching his smartphone to his ear, his face contorted in absolute primal panic. He was making a desperate run for his prized possession, a sleek midnight black luxury sports car parked in the private section of the lot. Julian had always bragged about that expensive car. He used it as the ultimate status symbol to convince investors, his wife, and our parents that his technology startup was wildly successful. Now he was going to use it as his swift getaway vehicle. He planned to flee the state, maybe even cross the border, before the federal authorities realized he had triggered a $15 million environmental fine and committed massive wire fraud. He thought he could just drive away from the catastrophic destruction he had caused. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I did not run. I did not even rush. I walked calmly down the wide concrete steps, my leather tote bag swinging gently against my side. I watched Julian reach the driver's side door of the powerful sports car. He yanked the handle aggressively, practically throwing himself into the low leather seat. I could see his frantic movements through the tinted windshield as he slammed the door shut and desperately reached for the ignition button. He pressed it once. Nothing happened. The engine remained completely silent. Julian hit the steering wheel with his fists, his mouth moving in a string of panicked curses. He pressed the ignition button again, harder this time. The dashboard did not light up. The engine did not roar to life. The expensive vehicle was essentially a massive heavy brick of useless metal. He looked down at his key fob, frantically pressing the unlock and lock buttons, trying to reset the internal computer system. I casually strolled across the asphalt, the rhythmic clicking of my heels announcing my arrival. I stopped directly in front of the sleek hood of the vehicle, crossing my arms over my chest. Julian looked up, his eyes widening in sheer terror when he saw me standing there. He rolled down the driver's side window, just a fraction of an inch, his breathing ragged and uneven. "What did you do to my car, Charmaine?" Julian demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Move out of the way, I need to leave right now." "You cannot leave, Julian," I replied smoothly, pulling a small silver device from my dress pocket. "And this is not your car." I held up the sleek metallic object for him to see. It was a master control key fob, specifically programmed by the dealership for the primary lien holder of the vehicle. Julian stared at the silver fob, his confusion rapidly turning into a suffocating, icy dread. "What is that?" he stammered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I leased this car. My name is on the paperwork. You cannot stop me from driving away." "You did lease it, Julian," I confirmed, offering him a bright, unapologetic smile. "But you stopped making the incredibly high monthly payments over 8 months ago. You were completely broke. Remember, the luxury dealership was actively preparing to repossess this vehicle. They sent you multiple warning letters which you conveniently hid from mom and dad. You were about to suffer the ultimate social embarrassment of having your fake billionaire sports car towed away from your driveway in broad daylight. Julian swallowed hard, the remaining color draining from his panicked face. How do you know that? Because I was the one who paid off your outstanding debt. I revealed, clearly savoring the absolute destruction of his massive, fragile ego. My private equity firm bought the distressed lease directly from the financing department. I paid the balance in full, which legally transferred the primary ownership title directly to my holding company. I let you keep driving it because I wanted you to maintain your pathetic illusion of wealth until the perfect moment. I own this luxury vehicle. Julian, I have owned it for the last 6 months. You are psychotic, Julian screamed, slamming his hands violently against the steering wheel. Let me start the car. I will pay you back. I will give you whatever you want. Just unlock the ignition system. You do not have any money to pay me back, I reminded him coldly. And you are not going anywhere. I pressed a button on the silver master fob. The heavy internal locks engaged with a definitive click. The electronic windows immediately rolled up, sealing Julian tightly inside the vehicle. He violently yanked the door handle, but the security measures had fully engaged. He was completely trapped. In the distance, loud approaching federal police sirens began wailing. My father stared at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic terror. He lunged forward again, desperately clawing at the pocket of my black dress where I had hidden my smartphone. He actually believed he could stop me. He thought that if he could just physically destroy the mobile device, he could erase the audio recording and somehow save his crumbling empire. I stepped back effortlessly, letting his own momentum carry him forward until he crashed heavily against the wall. "Give me the phone, Charmaine," he demanded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "Do not press send. You cannot send those files to the police. We are your family. I am your father. I am ordering you to delete that folder right now." I smoothed the fabric of my dress, watching him struggle to regain his balance. "You are not listening to me, Dad," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I said I am adding this new audio file to the folder. I never said I was waiting to submit the original financial documents. I submitted the forged commercial deed, the fraudulent bankruptcy filings, and the unauthorized medical trust transfers to the federal criminal database 3 days ago. The authorities already have everything they need." His jaw dropped. The last remaining shred of his fabricated confidence evaporated into the stale air of the secluded corridor. He finally understood that there was no negotiation. There was no secret buyout. The trap had been set long before he even walked into the country club this afternoon. Before he could process the sheer magnitude of his absolute failure, a brilliant flash of red and blue light sliced through the darkness of the hallway. The strobe effect illuminated the textured wallpaper, casting wild, frantic shadows across my father's terrified face. A second later, the deafening, unmistakable wail of multiple emergency sirens pierced through the thick, insulated walls of the country club. The sound was entirely different from the single ambulance that had arrived earlier for my mother. This was a massive, coordinated convoy. I turned my back on him and walked briskly toward the main lobby, eager to witness the grand finale. My father stumbled blindly behind me, dragging his feet like a man walking to the gallows. When we emerged into the grand foyer, the scene was one of utter cinematic chaos. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I could see at least 8 black heavy-duty federal vehicles forming a tight barricade across the pristine circular driveway. The flashing police lights bathed the elegant chandelier-lit room in a harsh, alternating neon glow. The elite socialites, politicians, and wealthy business owners were frozen in place, staring out the windows in absolute horror. The heavy oak doors were violently thrown open. A team of men and women wearing dark tactical gear and windbreakers, boldly printed with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, marched into the lobby. They were immediately followed by stern-faced officials wearing badges from the Environmental Protection Agency. This was not a quiet, polite inquiry. This was a highly coordinated, extremely aggressive federal raid. My mother, Elaine, who had finally managed to pull herself up from the marble floor, let out a piercing scream. She ran toward my father, grabbing his arm frantically. "Richard, what is happening?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the armed federal agents fanning out across the room. "Why are the police here? Tell them to leave immediately. We are Platinum Tier members." My father could not speak. He just stared at the agents with blank, defeated eyes. My mother whipped her head around to glare at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You called them just now, did you not?" she yelled, stepping toward me with her fists clenched. "You went into that hallway, you got mad at your father, and you called the authorities out of pure childish spite. You are a vindictive monster, Charmaine. You are ruining this entire family because you threw a tantrum." I stood my ground, entirely unfazed by her desperate screaming accusations. The wealthy onlookers were listening to every single word, their eyes darting between my screaming mother and the advancing federal agents. "I did not call anyone today, Mom," I announced loudly, ensuring my voice carried across the silent, tense room. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not organize a massive multi-agency raid in 5 minutes just because someone made a phone call from a hallway. They are here because I handed them irrefutable hard evidence of massive corporate fraud, identity theft, and environmental negligence 72 hours ago. They took their time verifying the evidence. They secured the arrest warrants. Now they are here to collect the criminals. The collective realization hit the high society crowd like a shockwave. These were people who survived entirely on reputation, clean public images, and exclusive associations. The moment they realized that my parents and my brother were not just experiencing a minor financial hiccup, but were actually the targets of a major federal criminal investigation, the social dynamic shifted instantly. Panic erupted among the elite guests. No one wanted to be in the background of a photograph when the federal agents started pulling out handcuffs. No one wanted their prestigious names associated with a toxic waste scandal or a grand larceny investigation involving an elderly woman's dementia fund. The mass exodus was immediate and brutal. The politicians who had just been drinking champagne with my father turned their backs and sprinted toward the side exits. The wealthy women who had spent decades gossiping with my mother aggressively pushed past her, actively avoiding making any eye contact. They treated my parents like a highly contagious, lethal disease. "Wait! Please do not leave!" my mother cried out, reaching her hands toward her fleeing friends. "We are innocent. This is just a misunderstanding. Charmaine is lying to everyone." No one stopped. No one offered a sympathetic smile. The wailing sirens amplified, echoing off the manicured hills of the Fairfield Country Club golf course. Within seconds, a convoy of black tactical vehicles tore up the pristine circular driveway, their heavy tires tearing through the immaculate landscaping. The vehicles swarmed the parking lot, aggressively boxing in the midnight black luxury sports car. Bright red and blue strobe lights flooded the asphalt, illuminating Julian's terrified face through the tinted glass. He was still frantically pounding his fists against the locked windows, looking like a panicked animal in a reinforced cage. Armed federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with prominent FBI lettering printed across their backs poured out of the vehicles. They were immediately followed by stern-faced officials bearing the distinct badges of the Environmental Protection Agency. They formed a tight perimeter around the trapped vehicle. One of the lead agents marched directly up to the driver's side door, tapping the heavy steel barrel of his flashlight against the reinforced glass. He shouted a command for Julian to exit the vehicle, completely unaware that I had engaged the remote master lock. The tactical precision of the federal agents was a terrifying, beautiful thing to witness. They moved with a cold, calculated efficiency that completely disregarded the fabricated social hierarchy of the Fairfield Country Club. These were men and women who did not care about platinum tier memberships, charity gala sponsorships, or how many generations a family had lived in a sprawling colonial estate. As they swarmed Julian's trapped sports car, the harsh alternating glare of the red and blue strobe lights cast long, frantic shadows across the manicured asphalt, turning the elegant driveway into a stark crime scene. The elite patrons inside the lobby pressed their faces against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, their eyes wide with a morbid, inescapable fascination. They were witnessing the total annihilation of a dynasty they had once envied, and the sheer spectacle of it kept them glued to the glass. Inside the locked vehicle, Julian's usual arrogant sneer was entirely gone, replaced by a look of sheer primal terror. He wept openly, his tears mixing with the sweat on his face. He mouthed frantic pleas through the reinforced glass, desperately begging for his corporate lawyers, entirely forgetting that his supposedly massive startup was a bankrupt shell company with zero legal representation on retainer. He was a cornered rat, finally realizing that all the unearned privilege in the world could not buy his way out of a federal indictment. The heavy thud of the agent's flashlight against the glass was rhythmic and demanding a countdown to the end of Julian's golden existence. I stood calmly on the wide concrete steps, savoring the absolute destruction of my brother's manufactured reality. I pressed the silver button on my master control fob one final time. The internal locks disengaged with a sharp click. The lead agent did not hesitate. He yanked the driver's side door wide open, reached inside, and grabbed my brother by the lapels of his ruined champagne-soaked suit. The agent hauled Julian out of the low leather seat with brutal efficiency, throwing him face first against the hood of the expensive car. Julian let out a high-pitched shriek of terror as his cheek smashed against the cold metal. Two other agents immediately grabbed his arms, twisting them roughly behind his back and snapping heavy steel handcuffs shut around his wrists. "You are making a massive mistake," Julian sobbed, his voice cracking as the cold steel bit into his skin. "I am a prominent technology CEO. I have powerful investors. You cannot treat me like a common criminal." The lead agent leaned in close, completely unfazed by my brother's pathetic delusions of grandeur. "Julian, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe criminal violations of the Environmental Protection Agency. Hazardous waste statutes," the agent recited firmly, his voice carrying across the silent parking lot. "You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it." The elite country club guests who had followed the commotion out onto the grand terrace watched the spectacular downfall of the golden child in absolute stunned silence. My father Richard finally stumbled out of the heavy oak double doors, his face pale and dripping with nervous sweat. He saw his precious son pinned against the hood of a car surrounded by armed federal authorities. The patriarch of our family immediately tried to salvage the situation using the only tool he had ever known. He puffed out his chest, adjusted his tie, and marched down the concrete stairs, attempting to project the formidable, untouchable aura of a wealthy Fairfield elite. "Officers, there is absolutely no need for this aggressive, theatrical display," my father announced loudly, stepping into the glaring strobe lights. "I am a platinum-tier resident of this gated community. I personally know the police commissioner, the mayor, and the district attorney. This entire situation is just a minor internal family dispute regarding a commercial real estate transfer. My son is a highly respected entrepreneur. Release him immediately, and I will have my corporate legal team contact your superiors in the morning to sort out this ridiculous misunderstanding." The lead federal law enforcement agent slowly turned away from Julian and looked my father up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You must be Richard." The agent said, his voice flat and devoid of any respect for my father's supposed social status. "We were just coming inside to find you. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." My father froze, his arrogant posture instantly collapsing. "Excuse me," he sputtered, stepping backward. "I am the victim here. You cannot arrest me!" Two agents stepped forward, grabbing my father by the shoulders and spinning him around forcefully. The sharp click of handcuffs echoing in the cool afternoon air sent a visible shockwave through the crowd of watching socialites. My mother Elaine burst through the country club doors just in time to see her husband and her golden child being marched toward the back of a federal transport vehicle. She let out a guttural, horrifying scream that tore through the quiet neighborhood. She sprinted clumsily down the long stairs, her very expensive silk designer dress catching sharply on the rough concrete steps, tearing the fine fabric. She violently threw herself toward the lead agent, pointing a frantic, trembling finger directly at me where I stood peacefully watching the arrests. "Take her!" My mother shrieked, her face contorted with insane desperation. "She is the criminal!" Charmaine orchestrated this entire nightmare. She hacked our computers and faked those documents because she is insanely jealous of her brother. "Arrest my daughter right now and let my innocent boys go." The lead agent looked at my screaming mother, completely disgusted by her willingness to sacrifice her own daughter. "We have the certified digital forensics, ma'am," the agent replied coldly. "We already tracked the exact internet protocol addresses used to commit the federal wire fraud and the illegal property transfer. The digital footprint did not come from your daughter's residence. The forged commercial deeds and the unauthorized medical trust fund wires were all executed directly from the primary desktop computer located inside your husband's private home office. We have all the hard evidence we need to secure a conviction." The stern federal agent turned his broad back on my hysterically weeping mother, leaving her completely shattered, publicly humiliated, and utterly alone on the cold, unforgiving asphalt parking lot. The flashing red and blue lights faded into the distance, taking the last remnants of my father's fabricated empire down the winding, manicured driveway. The wailing sirens grew faint, eventually swallowed entirely by the quiet, oppressive stillness of the affluent Fairfield neighborhood. My mother Elaine remained on the cold asphalt, her torn designer silk dress pooling around her like discarded trash. She was violently sobbing, rocking back and forth as the reality of her husband and son being hauled off to a federal penitentiary finally set in. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I simply turned away from the pathetic display, adjusting the strap of my leather tote bag on my shoulder, fully prepared to walk to my waiting car and leave this toxic chapter of my life permanently behind me. Before I could take more than a few steps, a sudden rustling noise caught my attention. A figure emerged from the thick, perfectly sculpted privacy hedges near the abandoned valet stand. It was Brooke. She had not made it very far after fleeing the country club lobby, when her billionaire father Preston publicly disowned her and drove away in his private town car. He had left her completely stranded. Her expensive custom-tailored silk dress was snagged and stained with dirt from hiding in the landscaping. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was a tangled, chaotic mess. The arrogant old money superiority that had defined her entire existence had been entirely stripped away. She looked like a terrified, cornered animal. Brooke had spent the last 30 minutes hiding in the bushes, watching the federal agents swarm the estate. She had watched them drag her newlywed husband away in handcuffs. The sheer suffocating terror of her legal reality had finally caught up to her. Julian was a federal criminal facing a $15 million environmental penalty. Since they were legally married without a valid prenuptial agreement protecting her, the government would inevitably scrutinize her finances. Her father had completely cut off her access to the Sterling family wealth. Her credit cards were likely already frozen by the corporate accountants. She had no house, no vehicle, no cash, and a massive federal investigation breathing heavily down her neck. Brooke stumbled across the driveway, her expensive high heels scraping harshly against the concrete. She stopped a few feet away from me, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. The venomous hatred in her eyes was completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked desperation. "Charmaine, please wait!" Brooke begged, her voice trembling so violently she could barely articulate the words. She held up her shaking hands in a placating gesture. "You have to listen to me. Please, just give me 2 minutes." I stopped walking. I turned to face her, maintaining my perfectly calm, relaxed posture. "I cannot imagine what we have left to discuss, Brooke. Your husband is currently sitting in the back of an FBI transport vehicle, and your father just abandoned you. I think you have enough on your plate today." "I am not like them," Brooke cried out, hot tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. She took another step toward me, dropping all pretenses of her elite social standing. "Julian lied to me. He manipulated me just like he manipulated you. I had absolutely no idea about the toxic waste site or the forged signatures. I did not know your mother was stealing from a dementia care fund. I am a victim of their disgusting toxic greed too, Charmaine. We are on the same side. I let out a soft, highly amused chuckle. We have never been on the same side, Brooke. You happily spent the money Julian stole from me. You drank the champagne and bragged about your luxury Italian honeymoon while sitting across the table from the woman whose property funded it. You only care about his crimes now because he got caught and the money ran out. Brooke shook her head frantically, wiping the tears from her cheeks with the back of her dirty hand. She suddenly dropped to her knees right there on the rough asphalt, directly mirroring my mother's pathetic collapse from earlier. The old money heiress was literally groveling at my feet. I have absolutely nothing, Charmaine, Brooke sobbed, gazing up at me with wide, pleading eyes. My father cut me off completely. He will not even let me back into the family penthouse. My credit cards are declining. I cannot associate with Julian, and I cannot afford a high-profile divorce attorney to protect myself from the federal asset seizures. Please, I am begging you. You own 51% of my father's hospitality group now. You are a massive private equity CEO. You have more money and power than anyone else in this city. Give me a job. I tilted my head, looking down at her in genuine disbelief. You want me to give you a job? I will do anything, Brooke promised desperately, her voice rising in pitch. I know the hospitality industry inside and out. I know all the major players, the investors, and the board members. I can be your executive assistant. I will be your most loyal employee. I will help you consolidate your power over my father's company. Just give me a salary and a place to live so I do not end up on the street. Please, Charmaine, you are the only person who can save me from total poverty. I stared at the weeping woman kneeling on the concrete. The stark contrast between the woman who had sneered at me over buttered toast this afternoon and the desperate beggar before me was truly poetic. I let the silence stretch out, allowing her to sit in the agonizing vulnerability of her absolute dependence on my mercy. That is a very generous and creative offer, Brooke, I finally said, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp register. But an hour ago, you were standing in the lobby of this country club screaming at my parents. You proudly announced that your elite old money parents had warned you not to marry into our family. You called us a bunch of desperate nouveau riche frauds playing dress-up in a world where we do not belong. You looked down on us with profound, unfiltered disgust. I did not mean it, Brooke wailed, reaching out to grasp the hem of my dress. I was just angry at Julian. I was lashing out, please forgive me. I took a deliberate step backward, ensuring she could not touch me. You meant every single word, Brooke, I corrected her firmly. You showed your true, authentic colors the moment you thought you held all the social and financial power. You looked down on my family because of your deeply ingrained classism and your thinly veiled systemic racism. You truly believed that your white generational wealth made you completely untouchable in this city. Brooke let out a devastated whimper, realizing her past arrogance had permanently sealed her fate. My private equity firm operates with a very strict human resources policy, I told her, delivering the final crushing blow without a single ounce of hesitation. We require our executives to possess integrity, basic intelligence, and personal accountability. And most importantly, we do not hire racists. You are going to have to face the federal authorities and your newfound poverty entirely on your own. I turned my back on her for the final time. A sleek, black SUV pulled up to the curb, driven by the security personnel from the company I now owned. The driver quickly opened the rear door for me. I stepped inside the comfortable, quiet interior of the vehicle. I did not look out the window as the heavy car door closed. I simply told the driver to take me home, leaving Brooke crying on the cold concrete driveway of the estate she used to rule, weeping right next to the disgraced mother-in-law she so deeply despised. The ride back to my penthouse was peaceful. I watched the lawns of Fairfield fade through the tinted windows. I had severed the infected limbs of my family tree, leaving them to rot. For exactly 7 days, I enjoyed absolute, uninterrupted silence. I drank coffee without receiving a single manipulative text from my mother. I conducted board meetings without wondering what financial disaster my brother was secretly brewing. The crushing weight of their expectations had vanished. But I knew the silence was only a temporary ceasefire. In the elite circles of Connecticut society, A massive federal raid was the ultimate scandal, and scandals always attracted the hungry eyes of the national media. Exactly 1 week after the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the country club parking lot, the story officially broke. It did not just make the local newspaper, it exploded across major financial news networks and television broadcasts. The headlines were sensational and relentless. They detailed the dramatic arrest of a prominent suburban patriarch and his technology entrepreneur son. The reporters highlighted the staggering $15 million environmental penalty and the shocking allegations of wire fraud. The public was completely captivated by the spectacular downfall of the supposedly perfect wealthy family. However, my father Richard was a man who had spent his entire existence manipulating narratives. Even from behind the cold bars of a federal holding facility, he refused to surrender his fabricated image without a vicious fight. On Tuesday morning, my father secured an exclusive recorded telephone interview with a highly rated national morning news anchor. I sat in my spacious glass-walled office, sipping espresso, as I watched the broadcast on the large television mounted across the room. The audio quality of the jailhouse phone call was poor, but my father's practiced, charismatic cadence was unmistakable. He deployed his most sympathetic, heartbroken tone. He completely ignored the hard, forensic evidence of his federal crimes. Instead, he boldly painted himself as a loving, devoted father who had been brutally victimized by a ruthless, sociopathic corporate monster. "My daughter Charmaine is a cold, calculating financial predator," my father told the national audience, his voice cracking with manufactured grief. "She is consumed by absolute greed. Julian and I made a simple, honest administrative error regarding a commercial real estate transfer. We were just trying to manage the family assets. But Charmaine used her massive private equity wealth to weaponize the legal system against us. She orchestrated a hostile financial takeover of her own flesh and blood just to boost her corporate portfolio. She stole our family home. She gleefully destroyed her brother's marriage. She sent federal agents to terrorize her own weeping mother. She is entirely devoid of any human empathy or basic moral decency." The manipulative performance was incredibly effective. The general public inherently loves a compelling story about a greedy billionaire systematically destroying her wholesome parents. Almost immediately, the tide of public opinion began to waver. Social media commentators who had initially mocked Julian's arrest suddenly started questioning my aggressive tactics. The narrative rapidly shifted from a story of justified legal consequences to a sensationalized tale of a vindictive daughter crushing her helpless family. My corporate public relations team rushed into my office, their faces pale with anxiety. They strongly urged me to book a defensive interview to humanize myself, to shed tears on camera, and to publicly explain my side of the story before the negative press damaged our firm's reputation. I calmly set my espresso cup down on my sleek mahogany desk. I firmly rejected their frantic advice. I was not going to sit on a television studio couch and engage in a pathetic emotional shouting match with a pathological liar. I was not going to play his manipulative game. I was going to rewrite the entire rulebook. "We are not doing a defensive interview," I instructed my public relations director, my voice projecting absolute, unshakable authority. "I do not need to defend my character because I have the receipts. We are going to release the digital dossier." Over the past 3 years, I had not just built a successful private equity firm. I had meticulously gathered and cataloged every single piece of financial abuse my family had committed against me. That afternoon, I bypassed the traditional news networks entirely. I released a polished, brutal, and undeniably factual documentary-style press release directly to every major social media platform and financial news outlet in the country. I did not include any emotional commentary or dramatic accusations. I simply provided the raw, unadulterated timeline of their horrific systemic financial crimes. The digital dossier hit the internet like a targeted missile strike. It displayed a terrifying 15-year paper trail of profound abuse. The first document was a bank statement from my 18th birthday, proving that my father had illegally drained my dedicated college tuition fund just to buy Julian a luxury sports car. The second document highlighted the forged signatures on multiple high interest loans my parents had secretly taken out using my social security number to fund their country club memberships. The final, most devastating pieces of evidence were the wire transfer receipts showing my mother systematically stealing money from my grandmother's dementia care facility to pay for Julian's lavish fake corporate lifestyle. The public response was instantaneous and absolutely explosive. The undeniable hard evidence completely shattered my father's pathetic, fabricated victim narrative. There was no room for debate. There was no room for public sympathy. The national media instantly retracted their skeptical coverage, pivoting aggressively to condemn the horrifying decade-long exploitation I had survived. The elite socialites who had briefly considered defending my parents quickly issued public statements completely disavowing them. My father had desperately tried to use the press to publicly humiliate me and salvage his ruined pride. Instead, he handed me the global platform I needed to permanently expose his monstrous reality to the entire world. The aftermath of the digital dossier release forced the federal prosecutors to accelerate their legal proceedings. The undeniable public outcry left the judge with absolutely no patience for delays. Exactly 2 weeks after my explosive press release shattered my father's desperate media campaign, the preliminary hearing commenced at the federal courthouse in downtown Hartford. I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by three of the most ruthless, expensive corporate attorneys money could buy. Across the wide aisle, the stark reality of my family's new social standing was on full display. My father Richard and my brother Julian sat hunched over the defendant's table. They were no longer wearing their custom-tailored designer suits. They wore cheap, ill-fitting gray suits provided by the court. Because I had successfully frozen all of their hidden assets and seized their sprawling estate, they could not afford private legal counsel. They were entirely reliant on an exhausted, overworked public defender who looked like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. My mother Elaine sat in the gallery right behind them, her face completely pale and stripped of its usual expensive makeup. A few rows back, Brooke sat surrounded by her own vicious legal team. Brooke was attending the hearing to gather evidence for her aggressive divorce proceedings against Julian. She glared at the back of his head with an intensity that could melt solid steel. The federal judge pounded his heavy wooden gavel, calling the chaotic courtroom to order. The primary goal of this pretrial hearing was to determine if there was sufficient evidence to bind Julian and my father over for a full criminal trial regarding the massive wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and the severe environmental violations. The public defender stood up, shuffling a disorganized stack of papers. He was attempting a desperate, completely fabricated defense strategy. He cleared his throat and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the defense formally motions to dismiss the charges of wire fraud and forgery. We argue that no actual theft occurred. My clients maintain that Charmaine provided explicit verbal consent for her brother to sell the log cabin. They argue that this is merely a civil family dispute over miscommunication, not a federal criminal conspiracy. The judge raised a skeptical eyebrow. Verbal consent for a commercial real estate transfer resulting in a $15 million federal penalty. That is quite a bold claim, counselor. Does your client wish to testify to this alleged miscommunication under oath? Yes, Your Honor, the public defender replied weakly. Julian practically sprinted to the witness stand. He placed his trembling hand on the Bible, swore to tell the whole truth, and sat down. He immediately turned on the waterworks. Julian looked directly at the judge, forcing thick, pathetic tears to well up in his eyes. He deployed the exact same manipulative golden child persona that had shielded him from consequences his entire life. It is the absolute truth, Your Honor, Julian lied smoothly, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. Charmaine told me to sell the cabin. She knew my technology startup was struggling. She told me to log into the family computer and use her saved digital signature to finalize the commercial deed. She wanted to help me fund my beautiful honeymoon with my new wife, Brooke. Charmaine set this entire trap up to frame me because she has always been deeply jealous of my success. My lead attorney did not object. He simply let Julian dig his perjury grave as deep as humanly possible. When the public defender finally concluded his direct examination, my attorney stood up and approached the center of the courtroom. He did not carry a single piece of paper. He only held a small digital flash drive. Julian, my attorney began, his voice echoing with lethal calm. You just testified under penalty of perjury that you acted entirely out of love for your new wife and that your sister willingly offered you her property. Is that your final sworn statement? Yes, Julian answered defiantly, jutting his chin out. I love Brooke, and Charmaine gave me permission. My attorney turned to the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution requests permission to enter Exhibit C into the official court record. This is a digital voicemail legally obtained through a court-ordered subpoena of the defendant's cellular provider. The voicemail was recorded and sent by Julian exactly 2 hours after he forged the commercial deed transfer. The judge nodded. Proceed. My attorney plugged the drive into the court's audio system. The entire courtroom held its breath. A sharp beep echoed from the overhead speakers, followed immediately by Julian's distinct, arrogant voice. He was not talking to his wife. Hey, Jessica, baby, it is me. Julian's recorded voice purred through the speakers, laced with a disgusting, arrogant smugness. I just pulled off the ultimate scam. I easily copied my stupid sister's signature from the computer network. She is so pathetic she will never even notice the cabin is gone until it is way too late. The money just cleared the bank. Listen, I have to play the devoted husband and take Brooke on this boring Italian honeymoon to keep her billionaire father happy. But the absolute second we get back to the States, I am filing for divorce. I am taking half of her trust fund and then I'm taking you to Paris. Pack your bags, gorgeous. The audio file ended with a sharp click. The silence in the federal courtroom was absolute terrifying and profoundly destructive. Julian's face drained of all blood. He looked like a reanimated corpse sitting on the witness stand. My mother let out a strangled, horrified gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. She finally realized her precious golden son was a complete sociopath who had destroyed his own highly lucrative marriage out of pure, arrogant greed. My attorney looked at Julian with profound disgust. No further questions, Your Honor. Brooke shrieked, leaped over the wooden partition, and violently attacked the lying witness. She did not just attack him. She launched herself with the primal, unhinged fury of a woman who had just realized her entire reality and future had been a meticulously crafted scam. The heavy wooden witness chair shattered against the railing, sending sharp splinters flying across the aisle as they crashed to the floor. Brooke's manicured nails tore fiercely into his cheap public defender suit, ripping the fabric and drawing bright red blood from his neck. She was screaming obscenities so vile that they made the hardened federal bailiffs momentarily freeze in pure shock. For Julian, the golden child who had spent his entire existence being coddled, praised, and shielded from even the slightest physical or emotional inconvenience, this public humiliation was completely world-shattering. He cowered on the floor, raising his chained hands in a pathetic attempt to block her blows, weeping and pleading for the guards to save him. The gallery erupted into absolute pandemonium. The local journalists and reporters who had packed the back rows expecting a dry, boring financial hearing were now furiously scribbling notes and standing on their toes, capturing every single second of the spectacular high society brawl. His carefully constructed facade of the brilliant, untouchable tech CEO was entirely obliterated, leaving behind nothing but a broke, exposed fraud cowering in the dust of a federal courthouse. Brooke was relentlessly slapping, scratching, and punching her deceitful husband, completely unhinged by the audio recording that had just exposed his massive betrayal. "You disgusting, lying parasite!" Brooke shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. "You planned to steal my trust fund. You were going to run away to Paris with your mistress. I am going to destroy you." The heavy thud of the judge's wooden gavel banged repeatedly against the sounding block, but the sharp noise was entirely drowned out by the screaming. 3 large, heavily armed federal bailiffs sprinted across the courtroom. They aggressively pulled Brooke off the sobbing, bleeding golden child. Julian scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his cheap gray suit torn at the shoulder and his nose bleeding profusely. It took two bailiffs to physically restrain Brooke, who was still kicking and screaming obscenities as they dragged her out of the double doors. The federal judge was absolutely livid. His face was a mask of furious, unadulterated outrage. He slammed his gavel down one final time, bringing a heavy, terrified silence to the room. My father, Richard, stood frozen at the defense table, his face completely drained of color. My mother, Elaine, sat in the gallery, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic humiliation playing out in federal court. "Order in this court right now," the judge roared, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "Get back to the defense table immediately. This is the most appalling, disrespectful display I have ever witnessed in my entire judicial career." Julian wiped the blood from his nose with a shaking hand, limping back to sit beside my horrified father. The exhausted public defender buried his face in his hands, completely aware that his clients had just destroyed any remaining shred of judicial leniency. The judge glared down from the high bench, shuffling the legal documents in front of him. The defense strategy was built entirely on a foundation of perjury. The judge stated, his voice dripping with severe reprimand. The audio evidence presented by the prosecution explicitly proves that the defendant Julian acted with malicious, premeditated intent to commit federal wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Furthermore, the sheer scale of the financial damage involving the $15 million Environmental Protection Agency penalty requires immediate, aggressive judicial intervention to prevent further asset dissipation. The judge picked up his pen and signed a thick stack of emergency legal orders. "I am officially binding both defendants over for a full federal criminal trial. Furthermore, effective immediately, I am signing an emergency federal asset freeze on all accounts, properties, holdings, and physical assets tied to the defendants. I am also extending this immediate asset freeze to any joint marital accounts, offshore holdings, and secondary trusts linked to their immediate relatives to ensure the $15 million federal penalty is fully secured. Court is adjourned." My father collapsed into his wooden chair, burying his head in his arms. He had just lost his final desperate battle. Every single hidden penny he had scattered across various bank accounts was now completely locked down by the federal government. My mother, Elaine, did not stay to comfort her weeping husband or her bleeding son. The second the judge mentioned freezing secondary trusts and offshore holdings, pure panic hijacked her entire nervous system. She practically sprinted out of the courtroom, pushing past the reporters and local journalists who were eagerly documenting the high society downfall. I calmly packed up my sleek leather briefcase, thanked my brilliant legal team, and followed her out into the bright afternoon sun. I found my mother standing frantically on the wide concrete steps of the federal courthouse. She was desperately jabbing her fingers into her smartphone screen, trying to log into a secret offshore banking application. For years, she had been slowly skimming money from my grandmother's dementia care fund, funneling the stolen cash into an untraceable, high-yield overseas account. It was her ultimate absolute safety net. She had planned to use that stolen money to hire a private defense attorney and flee the scandal. "Come on, load, please load," she begged the glowing screen, completely ignoring the curious stares of passing pedestrians. I walked down the concrete steps, stopping just a few feet away from her. I watched her type in her complex password for the third time. The screen flashed bright red. A bold, capitalized error message appeared across her phone display. It clearly stated that the financial institution had permanently seized the offshore account under the direct orders of the Federal Fraud Investigation Unit. The balance was completely gone. She had absolutely $0 to her name. My mother stared at the red error message, her hands trembling so violently that she nearly dropped the expensive smartphone. She tapped the screen again, completely unwilling to accept her sudden, crushing poverty. She then pulled a platinum credit card from her designer purse and frantically dialed the customer service number on the back, praying she still had a line of credit available to rent a hotel room or call a taxi. I stood quietly listening to the automated voice on the other end of the line, Inform her that the platinum card had been indefinitely suspended due to fraudulent activity. The facade of the elite Fairfield Society matriarch was permanently shattered. She had no hidden safety nets left. She was completely destitute, stripped of every single ounce of the unearned arrogance that had defined her entire miserable existence forever. 6 months dragged by in a whirlwind of federal indictments. The final sentencing hearing arrived on a bleak Tuesday morning. The federal courthouse loomed like a fortress of consequence. I sat in the back row of the gallery wearing a tailored navy blue power suit. My posture was perfectly straight. I did not bring my legal team today. I did not need them. The criminal justice system was handling the execution of my family's fabricated empire. The heavy double doors at the front of the courtroom swung open. The federal bailiffs marched my father and my brother into the room. They were no longer wearing cheap public defender suits. They were wearing standard-issue bright orange inmate jumpsuits. The humiliating color washed out their complexions. Their wrists and ankles were bound in heavy steel chains that clinked loudly with every step they took across the polished hardwood floor. The sound was a stark reminder of their new reality. My mother sat at the cold defense table wearing a faded beige dress. Her hair, once perfectly highlighted at exclusive salons, was now brittle and graying at the roots. She looked absolutely frail, completely broken by the harsh reality of her newfound poverty. The federal judge, a stern woman with decades of experience prosecuting white-collar crimes, entered the courtroom. The bailiff ordered everyone to rise. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands folded neatly. The judge took her seat at the elevated bench, peering down over her reading glasses at the 3 defendants trembling before her. She opened the thick sentencing dossier, turning the pages with deliberate slowness. This court has presided over hundreds of financial fraud cases. The judge began, her voice echoing with lethal authority. But the sheer greed displayed by the defendants in this room is truly staggering. You did not just defraud a commercial financial institution. You maliciously conspired to forge legal documents to saddle a family member with a catastrophic federal penalty, all to fund a lavish, entirely fabricated lifestyle. You attempted to dump a $15 million toxic waste liability onto an innocent party. Your actions display a profound lack of basic human morality and a blatant disregard for federal environmental laws. The judge closed the thick folder. She looked directly at my brother. Julian, please stand and face this court for your official sentencing. Julian slowly pushed his chair back. His heavy steel ankle chains rattled loudly as he stood up. He was weeping openly, fat tears rolling down his cheeks and dropping onto the bright orange fabric of his jumpsuit. He looked absolutely pathetic. You were the primary architect of the wire fraud and the forged commercial deed, the judge stated coldly. You leveraged a toxic environmental hazard to fund a luxury vacation, demonstrating supreme negligence. For the charges of aggravated wire fraud, felony forgery, and severe violations of the Environmental Protection Agency, hazardous waste statutes, I sentence you to 5 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Julian let out a loud, strangled wail. His knees buckled, and the bailiffs had to physically hold him upright by his chained arms. The golden child, who had never worked a hard day in his entire life, was going to spend the next 5 years locked inside a concrete federal prison cell. The judge did not even pause to let the reality sink in. She turned her sharp gaze toward my father. "Richard, stand up," she commanded. My father stood, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. You enabled, funded, and facilitated this massive criminal conspiracy. The judge reprimanded my father harshly. You abused your position of trust to orchestrate a fraudulent real estate transfer, and you hid the toxic nature of the property. For your direct role as a co-conspirator in this federal financial fraud, I sentence you to 3 years in a federal penitentiary. My father closed his eyes silently, accepting the final blow to his non-existent legacy. He would be nearly 70 years old by the time he tasted freedom again. The judge finally turned to my mother. Elaine, please stand. My mother stood up, her entire body shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. She clasped her hands together in a silent prayer. While your involvement did not directly trigger the environmental fine, your systematic theft from a vulnerable dementia care trust makes your actions utterly deplorable, the judge announced, her voice laced with profound disgust. However, due to federal sentencing guidelines regarding your specific financial charges, I am sentencing you to 5 years of strict probation. My mother let out a breath of relief, believing she had somehow escaped punishment. Furthermore, the judge continued, destroying her temporary relief. You are hereby ordered to complete 1,000 hours of mandatory supervised community service. I am assigning you directly to the Environmental Protection Agency remediation program. You will spend your days physically cleaning up the exact toxic waste site you and your family illegally tried to sell. My mother gasped aloud, horror quickly washing over her face. The Fairfield matriarch was going to spend the next 3 years wearing a high-visibility safety vest, picking up toxic debris and scrubbing contaminated soil on the side of a highway. The court officially adjourned. The bailiffs immediately stepped forward to haul Julian and my father away to the holding cells. As they were dragged toward the heavy side doors, all 3 of them stopped. They turned around and looked directly at me sitting in the back of the gallery. Their eyes were wide, desperate, and begging. They were silently pleading for a final ounce of pity, a single tear of sympathy, or a shred of familial mercy. I looked back at them completely devoid of emotion. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply gave them a polite professional nod, exactly like a corporate CEO, closing out a highly successful business transaction. I picked up my sleek leather tote bag, turned my back on them forever, and walked calmly out of the federal courtroom. 6 months had passed since the heavy federal doors slammed shut on the fabricated empire of my past. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my new corner office, looking out over the sprawling sunlit Atlanta skyline. The morning traffic moved steadily far below me, a distant reminder of the bustling, vibrant world I now actively participated in with total freedom. This magnificent top-floor executive suite had once belonged to Preston Sterling. When my proxy holding company executed the hostile takeover of his flagship hospitality group, I had immediately liquidated his redundant assets and relocated my own private equity firm into his pristine corporate headquarters. The massive mahogany desk, where Preston used to orchestrate his ruthless real estate schemes, had been completely removed entirely from the premises. I replaced it with a sleek, modern glass table, symbolizing the absolute transparency and ethical standards that now governed this entire building. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my warm morning espresso, enjoying the profound, uninterrupted peace that had finally settled over my life. The harsh, rigid federal prison system had successfully absorbed all the chaotic, toxic noise of my former family. I no longer woke up to manipulative text messages or frantic demands for emergency cash. Julian was currently serving his miserable 5-year sentence, permanently stripped of his designer suits and his pathetic delusions of grandeur. My father, Richard, was securely locked in a neighboring facility, his arrogant reputation permanently erased from the elite social circles he had blindly worshipped for decades. My mother, Elaine, spent her long, exhausting days wearing a bright orange safety vest, scrubbing thick, toxic sludge from the very hazardous waste site they had desperately tried to saddle me with. I never visited them. I did not send them money for the prison commissary. I had officially severed the infected branches of my family tree, and in doing so, I had finally allowed my own roots to thrive. I walked over to my desk and opened a thick, elegantly bound portfolio. It did not contain distressed property deeds or fraudulent bankruptcy filings. It contained the inaugural applications for the new charitable foundation I had officially launched last month. I named it the Horizon Empowerment Fund. The initiative was specifically designed to provide massive, unconditional financial grants to young, marginalized women who had suffered severe financial abuse at the hands of their own toxic families. I knew exactly how it felt to have your credit score destroyed by the people who were supposed to protect you. I knew the suffocating terror of having your hard-earned college savings drained to fund a golden child's extravagant lifestyle. I was using the massive profits from the sterling corporate takeover to ensure that dozens of brilliant, driven women would never have to choose between their familial obligations and their personal financial freedom. I was providing them with the bulletproof safety net I had been forced to build for myself. A soft knock on the frosted glass door broke my quiet concentration. I looked up and smiled a genuine warm smile. The heavy door swung open and my inner circle walked into the executive suite. These were the people who had stood by me when the illusion of my family collapsed entirely. My lead corporate attorney, who had brilliantly navigated the legal labyrinth of the federal court system, carried a box of fresh pastries. My top financial analysts, the sharp women who had helped me orchestrate the proxy buyout, followed right behind him, laughing brightly at a shared joke. And then there was Marcus. He walked in last carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee. He was a brilliant, grounded architect who had worked with my firm on several large commercial renovations. He did not care about elite country club memberships, and he completely despised the pretentious, toxic culture of high society. Marcus respected my ambition, celebrated my massive success, and never once tried to diminish my power to elevate his own fragile ego. He handed me a cup of coffee and kissed my cheek, his dark eyes crinkling with genuine affection. There were no hidden agendas with him. There was only absolute unwavering support. I looked around my vibrant, sunlit office, taking in the beautiful reality of the chosen family I had meticulously cultivated. I had spent my entire childhood trapped inside a sprawling, emotionally freezing colonial house in Connecticut, desperately trying to earn the validation of people who only saw me as a convenient financial resource. I had survived decades of systemic manipulation, blatant favoritism, and profound emotional neglect, but I had not let their toxicity poison my future. I had taken the heavy, suffocating generational curse that my parents had tried to pass down to me, and I had completely crushed it into dust. I had reclaimed my stolen property, exposed their massive federal crimes, and dismantled the powerful racist family that had tried to silence me. The painful memories of my pale blue childhood bedroom, the constant belittling, and the overwhelming emotional coldness were officially entirely behind me. I no longer needed to hide my brilliant mind or downplay my massive achievements just to make my arrogant family members feel comfortable in their own profound mediocrity. I had built a towering, ethical corporate empire out of the smoldering ashes of their pathetic, fabricated legacy. The wealth I now possessed was not a tool for malicious manipulation or a desperate hollow facade designed to impress shallow strangers at an elitist country club. It was a powerful instrument for genuine change, an impenetrable shield against financial exploitation, and a solid, unshakable foundation for the beautiful, authentic life I had always truly deserved to live. I was finally completely free. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes blood is just a biological trap. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and remember, never let anyone forge your worth. Like and subscribe for more stories.